Currently, he is a specialist at iProspect, and he takes care of customer care and after sale for General Motors. He implements and reports on paid search and social campaigns that include Chevrolet Performance and AC Delco. Eric, as I said, is the AMU grad, and he lives in Ann Arbor, and he has his own passion for MacBook and kick soccer ball, and he takes photographs. Please welcome Eric Wolf.
Cool. You guys hear okay through? Just fine. Cool. All right. Good morning. How you guys doing? Cool. Quick show of hands. How many people are like a client? Like you own your business? One guy. All right. How many people are like implementers or whatever? Like you're the ones managing? Okay. How many people are just hanging out, learning stuff? Okay. Cool. So just somebody's got to do that, right? So I'm going to talk about measuring search, and this kind of applies to social or anything else you're doing it, but basically just looking at the data and how you might be looking at the right thing or the wrong thing or what you should be looking at. So I'm not going to let the social track have all the fun. I'm going to start off with a cat picture. But this just demonstrates how you can look at stuff from a couple different ways. So obviously, you could either have, there's a cat face on the bag, or is it a real cat? So if you're bored in this session, just take out your phone and Google funny optical illusions. You get some good stuff. So I was doing that for way too long last night. I want to start off, everybody remember the Old Spice campaign? I think the guy's name was Mustafa. It's pretty memorable. So I thought this was a good example. It doesn't really relate to search, but it's this huge campaign. It went viral. It won, the line at Cannes or Cannes, but it went nuts. And so then, everyone was reporting on it. Everyone was tweeting about it, sharing it. And then, of course, what happens then, there's the backlash. So, people trying to get clickbait or whatever. So somebody wrote a headline, Old Spice viral, gets attention, not sales. And there was this line here in it where Red Zone sales fell 7% after the campaign. So for those that don't really know, Red Zone was kind of like a division, one of the brands of Old Spice. So the ads were originally developed to promote the Red Zone line. Not really sure what that Red Zone line is apparently, but everyone starts to hate on the campaign. But then, as you can see in the title here, they had to go back and update the report because actually sales overall for Old Spice went up 107%. So if you were maybe on Team Red Zone, you might not have had a great month or a great quarter. But if you were maybe the CMO at Old Spice, you're like, hey guys, great job, but if we're specifically trying to sell Red Zone, maybe we should make that a little bit more prevalent as opposed to a shirtless guy on unicorns and stuff like that. But it's just a good example of, figure out what you're measuring, and then maybe that metric didn't do well, but maybe another metric did do well. So I want to do a little bit of a case study here. I have a couple case studies. This is a search result that I try to show up in a lot. So we do customer care and after sales at GM. So that's basically once you buy a car, I try to take more of your money, keeping that car on the road, keeping that car running right, maybe putting some cool parts on it, making it faster. So I don't sell cars, I just, keep you happy with your car, I guess. But so this is if you searched, basically for Chevy oil change. So I got my Chevy Cruze, I'm looking for an oil change. So we got this ad coming up right here. Everyone decently familiar with the search result, hopefully? Okay, you're in the advanced track, I guess. But so you have the Chevy search result here. And we were saying, we were showing these ads to basically everyone that searched for a Chevy oil change. So think of your business, okay, somebody just searching for, if you're a law firm, somebody search, I don't know what you'd search for, I'm in trouble or I'm going to jail, whatever you search for. But we were saying, okay, well, these people have to come to a dealership. So how far would you drive to get your oil changed? Maybe if you're in North Dakota, you travel 20 or 50 miles or something like that. But if you think, I live in Ann Arbor, I'm probably not going to drive even 7, 8, 9 miles to Ypsi to get my oil change. So from there, we started off, we used to target nationally. And then we said, let's tweak this a little bit. So we used something called radius targeting. If you have questions on that, feel free to come up to me after. But so within our Google AdWords and Google Bing Ads campaigns, instead of targeting nationally, we uploaded a list of 4,000 dealerships that we have that serve Chevy and that do oil changes at their Chevy dealership. And we said, okay, let's do a 20-mile radius around there. We didn't want to do anything crazy. We didn't want our ad spend to tank or whatever. And we found, nothing really happened there. So we're like, okay, well, let's take that radius instead of 20, let's go down to 5. So, the client originally they're a little worried, okay, we're not going to reach everybody. It's like, yeah, but again, are people going to drive from Ann Arbor to Ypsi just to get the oil changed? So luckily, our clients are pretty sophisticated. So, we showed them, this is the average driving distance. They had some data. We thought it through. So you really want to think it through. And we came up with some results. So again, there was a smaller reach, but like the Old Spice example, if I just came to my client and said, hey man, we reached a lot fewer people. We didn't touch as many people. Maybe a less sophisticated client, I don't want to pump up GM too much, but they are awesome. But a less sophisticated client would be, oh wow, your reach went down, that's bad. Well, that's not necessarily bad because the click-through rate went up. So the more people were more likely to click on our ad. And then they were more likely to be familiar with the dealership. Maybe they were getting mail, maybe they already go there. So you get kind of all that residual advertising or the billboard. They just know about that dealership more. So the conversion rate went up. So basically, even though we were driving less traffic, less people were seeing our ad, the people that came to our site were more likely to go get an oil change or to locate a dealership or to do something like that. So when you're coming up with a test, don't just say, okay, more money or more clicks or more impressions or whatever. Think about, okay, what would be the right metric to look at? So everyone's kind of seen, something similar to this, but you can kind of break up metrics into different, forms, different paths in the conversion funnel, or the buying cycle, or the decision path, or whatever. So, awareness is some things. You just want to get word out, or you're opening a new coffee shop or something like that. You might want to focus more on impression or awareness metrics, like impressions. How many people are seeing your ad, and then are they connecting with your ad? Are they clicking on it? And again, this applies to paid social or really any other marketing you're doing. Consideration. If people are like, okay, yeah, I'm clicking on it. Maybe how much that's costing you. That's better if people are actually considering. They're like, oh yeah, I'm going a little further. I want to do this. And then obviously purchase. What are people doing on your site? Hopefully you have Google Analytics or some sort of tracking on your site. So, and then you got the cliche, Jane Jetson. I don't know if some of you are hopefully old enough to remember. You give, here's $5, and I'll just take the rest. You keep the $5. So hopefully you take their wallet and not just the $5. So there's front-end metrics and there's back-end metrics. Front-end metrics are what's on Google AdWords or maybe in Facebook or whatever. So just think of, I just kind of want to go through these real quick, but think about what the different metrics might mean. So obviously impressions, increased visibility. So you can go to your boss, hey, I got a lot more people seeing your ad. But you know what, it might be less relevant. If you own your own business and some guy comes to you and says, hey, I got you more impressions, you're saying, okay, that's cool, but are they relevant impressions? You can say, hey, I got less impressions. Oh, that's really bad. It's not necessarily bad, they're more relevant. So you can kind of go through this process. Clicks, you get more traffic, but it might cost you more. If you have fewer clicks, it might be more efficient use of your spend, but then again, you have fewer opportunities, so hopefully your site's doing well. Cost per click, there's positive and negatives to there too. Click-through rate too. Again, if your click-through rate's going up, engaging copy, you're not, but then again, if your click-through rate goes down, you might be filtering traffic. I have kind of another case study on that too. Back-end metrics, again, this is what's going on with your site. Generally, these are a little more telling. There isn't as much back and forth with it, but for the cost per KPI, or basically cost per conversion, if your cost per KPI is going up, maybe that means you're collecting more leads. Hopefully, you know your margins, and you can say, okay, I'm willing to have a higher cost per lead. I'm willing to, pay $100 every time somebody calls my business. Because I'm going to make $10,000 off the whole customer lifetime. But then again, more spend is needed, so you might not have the budget. If your cost per lead is going down, more efficient spend, but then are you leaving leads on the table? So just always think about these, and don't just say, okay, this metric is good, we want to do this, I want to lower my cost per click. Well, maybe you don't want to. And then again, conversion rate. I was trying really hard to think of what would be a positive for your conversion rate going down. I don't really think that would be it. But so basically, if your conversion rate's going down, that's bad. That's the one kind of rule you can do. So we'll go back to the search result here. We did the second ad. We kind of, we'll sell oil changes or whatnot through the brand pages through Chevy or GMC, but we also have a kind of a non-branded entity. If you were searching to get an oil change, you might not put Chevrolet oil change or Chevy oil change. You might just put oil change Ypsilanti or oil change Detroit. So GM, we have kind of a non-branded site called My Certified Service, and we basically capture all that non-branded traffic through there. It can be a little more expensive, a little more competitive, but we've really been trying to only target GM owners. The shops have been very busy lately. There's been a lot of, recalls and things like that. But, they were saying we don't necessarily want to conquest and try and get, Eric's fiance's Ford Escort into the GM dealership. Let's just focus on GM dealers. So that's kind of going back to the metrics. We're saying, okay, let's try to make our targeting maybe a little smaller but more efficient. So anybody familiar with site links in here? Anybody doing paid search? So this is a close-up on the ad. So what we did was we added site links, and we targeted these to the different divisions. Now, pro tip, technically, what these site links do is they drive to other pages. Now, technically, Google and Bing don't want you driving to different domains. So I'm not really supposed to be going to Buick.com, Chevrolet.com, but oftentimes they don't catch that. So if you are a business, you have multiple domains, oftentimes they let you link out to Facebook or YouTube, but sometimes you can get away with this. So, but if Google comes back and slaps you on the wrist, I did not tell you that. But so what we were trying to do with this, we didn't have enough room in the ad copy to say, hey, if you're only a GMC, Buick, blah, 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 blah owner, click here. No, we want to have the price point. We want to have the 27-point inspection, the other differentiators in our ad. But we said we still wanted to filter out people. So we came up with the idea of, well, let's kind of go around the rules a little bit and put the GM owners in the site links. So hopefully what we're doing here is people will see that still, and they might just think, okay, they serve everybody, but primarily those people. But what we're hoping is that that'll filter out some of the traffic, and Eric's fiance who has a Ford won't click on the ad. So what happened with that? Well, luckily, again, we had the sophisticated client. We kind of prepped him for it. We saw less traffic. We saw lower click-through rates. So we kind of anticipated this. So while we're targeting basically a branded message to non-branded searches, we said, okay, what's going to happen? Less people are going to click on our ad. And if you're familiar with Google or Bing search, less people click on your ad. It might be more expensive to keep the same position. So we told the client, we said, it might be more expensive. We might have to increase our cost per click if we're going to do this. But then we said, but in theory, your conversion rate will probably be higher. So while we're paying a little bit more for the traffic, we're going to be closer to the traffic, but then we also are more confident that they are a GMC, Buick, Cadillac owner. The conversion rate is going to be higher, and eventually we're going to make money. And so the client, being awesome, was like, yeah, okay, let's do that. I'm cool with some of the metrics that we were focusing on not improving, as long as kind of the bottom line does improve. So we did see a higher conversion rate, and Tom Brady was very happy. So again, I just really want you to think about, what are you testing, and then come up with not necessarily one metric, and then come up with, always think of kind of both sides. Okay, this metric is going to change. Think about both of them. And then monitor the right metrics. That's big too. So don't just monitor everything. Say, okay, this test is meant to do this. So if you are doing an awareness campaign, maybe you're not focusing on the conversion rate as much, saying, again, you're opening a new coffee shop, you're opening a new law firm, you know what, maybe it would be great just to get a lot of impressions or have a lot of people see our ad on Facebook. They might not like it a lot, but we're trying to get the word out there. So really think about what you're trying to do. So that's about all I have. If you do have any questions, we kind of blew through a lot of it, but feel free to email me, connect with me on LinkedIn, or you can always tweet me. So, yeah.
In your experience, do you think that if you do some paid Google search at, AdWords or image campaigns, that Google rewards you on any level in the organic side?
The classic question. They do not. They definitely do not. That is church and state. Probably even more so for Google. Not to get political, but no, they definitely do not. There's no, you give Google a bunch of money, they're doing organic completely different. Now, there is going to be some mutual benefit if you're doing some really good SEO and your site's showing up organically higher. That usually means, and Google just do, I'm not trying to be a Google slappy or anything, but Google's trying to serve the best results, best site experience, blah blah blah. So if your results are showing up higher, generally you're just doing a better job with that. And then if you're also driving paid search, the same traffic, you'll probably just see better results because you'll get better engagement. So you will see mutual benefits, but it won't be because Google's like, hey, thanks for that, $5K last June, I'll help you out in the organic. There's just in general, when you're doing SEO, always do, white hat. Don't do anything, sketchy or anything, because they will catch you and they'll find you. So. Mm-hmm.
I'm taking Google AdWords class now, and what would you do when you have a lot of impression but no clicks?
A lot of impressions, but no clicks. So, little clicks? Yeah, okay, little clicks. So there's a few things you should look at. Are you doing like Google Grants or, okay, so your bids are probably, your kind of bids are capped. You can only bid like $1 or something. So I would look at first, where are ads showing up? So you can look at average position. So if you're getting a lot of impressions, maybe you're showing up at the bottom of the page, but no one's clicking on your ad. So it would probably either be, okay, showing up really low, so people aren't viewing all the way down to the page. Some types of searches, people only click on the top 3. The other thing I would do is look at your ad copy. Do a search yourself. See what you're showing up, seeing what the other people that are competing on that same search result are offering. Because especially the people in the top 3, they're either paying a lot of money, but more likely they're getting a lot of clicks. And so if you're offering something completely different, maybe you shouldn't be in that exact space. Maybe you should be looking for some different keywords. If you're doing that, a lot of times add local modifiers. So if it's appropriate, if you're, like Hands-On Museum works with Bud in his class, don't just do, fun activities for children. That's a little too broad. But if you do fun activities in Ann Arbor for children, all of a sudden, you might get fewer searches, so lower reach, but it's a lot more relevant. So if you can add local terms, that helps a lot, but look at average position, cost per click, and then see if it's something you can compete in. If you can't, you might just have to find some different keywords. So.
You mentioned running ads on Google and on Bing.
Mm-hmm.
What's the mix for Google versus Bing?
Usually, the unsophisticated answer is dump all your money into Google, and then when you have extra money, go into Bing. My Bing reps would not like me saying that, but generally that's the typical approach is, hey, we got some extra money, or say all of a sudden you were like, wow, these keywords are really competitive, so we're going to do this smaller set of keywords. Now you have all this extra money, but you found some really targeted keywords. Okay, let's take that kind of extra money that we weren't blowing on Google and put that into Bing. It is worth, if you have the time and resources and budget, to look at Bing, because depending on your vertical, oftentimes Bing users, they could be maybe be a little older. We also support AC Delco, so a lot of like mechanic shops, we find it sometimes connects better on Bing because they're just using the default browser, they're just using Internet Explorer, they might be more likely to do Bing. It's a generalization, but you can oftentimes see differences in cost per click or conversion rates, Google and Bing. So it's nice to even take kind of what's working best in Google and dump that into Bing and see what happens. And even if you got to take out some budget for a little while, put it into Bing just to test, I recommend doing that. Any other questions? Cool.
Any other question? Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Retherath, and he is primarily a market analyst, and he is at Dew Security, responsible for managing online advertising, analyzing online and offline marketing performance, and leading testing and optimization efforts. Prior to his current job, he was a senior digital strategist at VML for clients such as Kimberly-Clark, Kellogg's, and Heinz. His background in search marketing includes managing SEO services, leading paid organic search strategy at Charles River Interactive in Boston. He served clients such as Zipcar, Constant Contact, UNICEF USA, MIT, and Harmonic. Please welcome Luke.
Thank you for the patience with my technology issues. So I'm Luke Retherath, and when Bud asked me to talk about measurement and search marketing particularly, I actually found it kind of challenging to think through how we would talk about measurement outside of talking about a more holistic approach to both strategy and measurement. Even if you're in an organization or a team where you have delineated roles of strategists and planners and analysts, I think creating a separation between those people and kind of expecting someone to be the strategist, someone to be the implementer, and then someone else to measure it is the wrong way of approaching it. And coming from more of an analyst perspective, it's virtually impossible when we get brought in when a campaign is in market or a campaign has already run and we're asked now to decide did it work or not, and we weren't involved in the strategy or planning process. This is my requisite slide of logos to show all the interesting things that I've done. Right now, I am at Duo Security. I've been there about 6 months. It's a technology company in Ann Arbor. We do user authentication. I have zero background in security, but I have a lot of experience on the online advertising side. I worked at agencies for about 8 years before Duo, and then was client side before that. And I've worked with just pure e-commerce clients where measurement is relatively easy, all the way to SaaS companies selling heavy integrations to Fortune 500 companies with 12-month sales cycles where measurement is very difficult. So I think the two things that I want to address this morning when thinking about measurement and really just search in general is number one, approaching it with some kind of simple framework to understand not only how you're going to measure it, but just as importantly, what your strategy is, what your approach is, who you're reaching, why you're reaching, and then allowing that to define how you measure. So to begin with, you have to understand your customer. To do this, I think, so McKinsey published the Consumer Decision Journey several years ago. And basically they said this idea of looking at your customer in terms of the inverted pyramid, the funnel, where you have awareness at the top, purchase at the bottom is okay. But the customer, regardless of whether you're car dealership, a law firm, a huge consumer packaged goods brand, the customer decision journey is really the same, and it's just the ways that people are engaging or, in the case of search, looking for information relative to you during this process might be different. The cycles might be longer or shorter, but in general, you can take almost any market, any industry, any company, and think of your customer within this framework. And the reason I like this as well is because it gives you a way, from a search perspective, of really categorizing your strategy. So understanding what does someone look for when they're closest to that point of purchase, what are they looking for when they're in that consideration evaluation stage, and so on. So you can categorize your strategy, categorize your measurement by this, and also you can use this to allocate budget in the case of paid media and resources in the case of something like search engine optimization. So for search specifically, I think it's important to start simply, and because we can infer so much intent behind what a user is looking for based on their search query, I think it's important to start as close to the point of purchase as you can. You could build out a campaign to try and target trigger activities, consideration activities, experiential activities, and purchase activities. But my challenge, unless you have essentially an infinite budget, is to start at that point closest to purchase and then move backwards from there. So what that might look like, if I was running a search campaign for a local Honda dealership, when you start thinking about the keywords that people are going to be using when they're close to the point of purchase, you want to get, it's going to be very specific. So this, a search query such as 2014 Honda Civic Brighton, Michigan, tells me that this person knows they want a new car, they know the make and model they want, and they are close enough to the point of purchase where they're actually looking for something relatively close to where they live, probably. You move back a step to that consideration evaluation stage. You're going to be thinking about keywords like fuel-efficient vehicles. So again, I'm a Honda dealership. I know that I have inventory that can fill this need, but this is a potential customer that hasn't necessarily committed to Honda, hasn't even given me any indication that they're close to the point of purchase yet. I don't know if this is a 6-month research process for them or if this is 3 weeks. And then moving back one step even further, so a trigger activity, this might be Their car got dinged in the grocery store parking lot. It might just be that they buy a new car every few years. And so these people are looking for something very generic, new car deals. This is going to be something, especially if you're a smaller business, if you're a car dealership, on the paid search side, it's going to be a really expensive place to play. You're going to be competing against Eric and iProspect, who are advertising for GM. And if you're on the SEO side, it's going to be virtually impossible for you as a small organization to compete for these really broad, generic kind of terms. So with all that in mind, I use these dollar symbols, and you can think of it in terms of budget allocation for paid media, but I think it works just as well from the SEO side too when you're building out your strategy and you're thinking, about initially the first step for either of those efforts is going to be thinking about the keywords that people are using. So on the SEO side, you can just think of it in terms of the resources that you're going to allocate towards these different areas. For SEO, it's as finite as the dollars are on the paid side, in the sense that you're going to need people who are going to be creating content, looking at pages. There's a lot of work involved there. And again, I just say, search. People talk all the time about how great search is because it's this channel where we're able to actually really, to a degree that isn't possible in most other media channels. We can understand what somebody is actually looking for, and we can give them a relevant value proposition to meet their needs. And so with all that in mind, I always try to start out simple, and I always try to start out as close to that point of purchase as possible. In the case of Duo Security, we have most of the people that we're bringing into our marketing system are coming in via a trial request. So you can sign up for a free 30-day trial. So when we think about how we structure our paid search campaigns or our SEO efforts, we want to get really good at all those people who are really close to converting, and then really not look to expand beyond that until we feel like we've essentially maxed out what we can do there. We found as much efficiency as we can. We have more money to spend. We have more time to allocate to other areas. We're not at that point yet. And I don't know, a lot of organizations, I've worked on a lot of projects where essentially you never do that. You can just focus on this area for a really long time and get really good at it. So that's kind of the background of how I approach just laying the groundwork for not just measurement but strategy from a search perspective. So then the second item that I want to talk about, which is more pertinent to measurement, is so measure what matters, and how do we figure that out? So in digital marketing and search really specifically, we have so many different things that we can measure that at best I think it's overwhelming, and at worst it becomes a distraction. We have cost per clicks, impressions, click-through, view-through, conversions, all these different things that you can think about and look at. And I've worked on projects where we've been asked to measure the success of a program against 10, 12, 15 different KPIs, goals, objectives, whatever. And then the issue is that when you have so many different things that you're measuring and you don't have a real strong sense of why you're measuring those things, you're going to see some go up, and Eric alluded to this, some are going to improve, some are going to get worse, and you kind of put your hands up and say, I don't really know if it was good or not, because this thing did better, this thing did worse. This is a quote from somebody outside of the search marketing industry, but I think it's pertinent to what we do as well. The goal is to keep the goal the goal. So if you put in the work ahead of time to define what your strategy is, you should have a good sense of what success is going to look like. So you should know what your goal is, what your key performance indicator or maybe indicators might be. So the goal really is to keep that goal the goal. A lot of times too, what I see is we're really disciplined in the upfront planning process. We know what we're going to do. We know why we're doing it. We know how we're going to measure it. And then we launch, and something happens. It doesn't go the way we thought it would. And then all of a sudden we start saying, well, maybe we weren't trying to do this thing. We were actually trying to do this thing because this thing is the thing that's going up. And sometimes there's merit to that, but I think it's really important to stay disciplined and say, we're doing this, we're targeting these people, we expect these kinds of results from that. If we don't see that happening, that's a learning experience. We can take something from that and try to apply that in the next thing we do. But I think it's a slippery road when you start changing your objectives when your campaign is in market or after it's run. Also, just as importantly, this was, I can't remember who said this, but the K in KPI does not stand for thousands of performance indicators. So if you're trying to measure a campaign by too many things, again, it just becomes overwhelming, confusing, because you're going to see CPCs are up, CTRs are down, impressions are up, conversion rate is looking a little better. You know, all these different things are moving around. If you have too many things that you're measuring a program against, it can become really difficult to actually say what's working. Again, you know, this is for 95% of programs that are out there. If you're running an e-commerce website, it's really easy to say we're getting more sales, we're selling, you know, higher value things, we can see the ROI. Most people aren't fortunate enough to have that direct tie to sales, and so we have to really think seriously about what we're measuring and why. So the way that I approach this is, you know, we've got two different things that we're measuring. So we have our KPIs and then we have our diagnostics. So Eric talked about front end and back end metrics. It's a similar idea. And essentially what we can do is we can define the KPI ahead of time. So this is, you know, we've got our strategy. We know who and why and how we're reaching out to people. And out of that, we can define what does success actually look like. So if, you know, if I was running a restaurant, we might say we don't have online reservations available, but we think that views of the menu or downloads of the menu is going to be the best indicator, at least directionally, of us being successful in what we're doing. So that's going to be our KPI. And then you can have a set of diagnostics. And this is, you know, to recognize that we have a lot of different things we can measure. We shouldn't ignore them just because it can become overwhelming, but we have to create the separation of what is a KPI and what is a diagnostic measure. So a diagnostic isn't going to be what we use to measure the success of a program, but it can help us understand when we see movement against a KPI, it can help us to start to diagnose why that's moving. If we see menu downloads are going down, we can look then at some of our diagnostics, which might be more direct response activities, things like bounce rates and cost per clicks and pages per visit. And we can start to use that to get a better sense of why we think that KPI's movement is happening. But again, we're not taking that diagnostic measure and now creating a KPI out of it. And finally, I think, so just some really practical tips. Again, this is beyond just measurement, but when approaching search, whether it's on the paid side or the organic search side, is Benjamin Franklin who said, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. I can't stress that enough because I've worked both on the agency side and client side on so many projects where we kind of just, you know, everybody's under a lot of pressure, there's time constraints, we kind of put something out there. And then we try to figure out later, is it working, is it not working? So, you know, be really disciplined and deliberate in your planning process and allow that planning process to inform what success looks like and how you measure it. Start at the closest point of purchase. Again, I think this is really important for people, and it's applicable not just for the, you know, the e-commerce sites, but it's, or the, you know, even an organization like Duo Security where we have people signing up for a trial online. But try to get, you know, if you're putting forth some kind of search effort, you're investing resources in it, you should have some compelling reason to do that. You should have a reason that you believe you're going to be reaching potential customers. So think about what their engagement with you is going to look like on the website. If it isn't filling out a contact form or something like that, that's really easy to track. Trying to get some level of confidence in what you can measure to at least give you a directional sense of whether you're being successful is really important. Number 3, target really aggressively. So this is especially true on the paid search side. I always like to start with programs that are contracted pretty tightly compared to what I think the actual potential is, and then build out from there. So you can do that in a lot of different ways. From keyword match types, making sure that you're using phrase match, exact match, the nuances there you can read about on the Google AdWords site, to just even the networks that you're targeting. So one of my biggest issues with Google is that when you create a campaign, you're defaulted into both display and search networks, which for a lot of veteran search people isn't a big deal, but I think there's probably a lot of advertisers out there who are spending $500,000 a month of their money trying to promote their business and have no idea that they're not actually running a search program. Most of their ads are being shown on the display network. So I have some really practical explanations of how you can go into the AdWords tool if you go to that URL there, and just put some of these best practices in place. Make data-informed bets. So this is probably the analyst in me talking, but I think it's important not just to understand what you're measuring, but why and what success actually looks like. So again, if I was a restaurant owner, and I've decided that menu downloads are the best indicators I have on my website of what success might look like. You don't have to be a mathematician, but maybe you look at over the last 6 months or 12 months, what was my average weekday download volume of menus, and what was my average weekend volume, and then what was my, how many tables did I turn over on weekdays, and how many did I turn over on weekends, and try to see what is the relationship there. And if you are going into this and you say, I want to increase the volume of people coming to my restaurant 5% on weekdays and 10% on weekends, look for what's that relationship that I can see historically, and even if you're wrong, at least try to figure out what you think, what your expectations of success would look like. So how many additional incremental menu downloads do you think you need on a weekday, and how many do you think you need on a weekend? You could be wrong, and you'll find out when you get going and you start to see those numbers reaching the points that you thought you would, and then you can adjust from there. But I think it's important to draw a line in the sand and say, this is why we're doing it, this is what we're measuring, and this is what we think success looks like. Optimize for the upside, not against the downside. This goes back to understanding the difference between a KPI and a diagnostic. So a lot of times people will look at something like bounce rate and try to adjust, make fairly significant sweeping changes to a program because they see my bounce rate is too high. And so they're optimizing against the downside. If we have a really strong sense of what we're doing and why we're doing it and what success looks like, we should always be optimizing for that, not to try and minimize our downside. At Duo, again, we have some really practical examples of this. We have a campaign, one of our largest campaigns, where we spend a pretty significant amount of money, and our bounce rate is generally north of 90%. So that means 90% of people that we're paying to drive to our site come to the site, view the landing page, and just leave immediately. So this causes a lot of concern whenever I show that to people above me, because we're paying for these people. That sounds like a really bad thing, but it's also the most cost-effective trial source that we have outside of our branded search campaign. So this is a campaign where we have a significant amount of inventory. There's a really big marketplace that we could be buying against. And our cost per trial is lower than any of our other similar campaigns that we run. So even though we have this really high bounce rate that we can try to diagnose and work with, we don't want to make big sweeping changes to it, because what we're seeing is we have a really efficient means of capturing people and bringing them into our system. And that at the end of the day, that's what's important. If we have a 98% bounce rate, but we can drive more people to try our product, that's what we should be striving for, not some vanity metric of reducing our bounce rate on a page. And then finally, everyone always says this, but always be testing. I think on the paid side, the worst thing you can do is have campaigns up and running with just one ad, or using one ad and applying it across all of your different campaigns and ad groups. You should always have multiple ads. You don't have to be looking at them all the time, but you should always have things that you're positioning against themselves. So AdWords allows you to actually, in the settings, you can say rotate my ads based on clicks or rotate my ads based on conversions. So you can put 6 different ads in there and just choose the setting to rotate based on conversions. If you have conversion tracking enabled, AdWords is going to do all the optimization for you for the next 6 months, so you don't even have to worry about it. But I think it's always important to be testing on the paid side your ads, your keywords. Landing pages are another one that's a really easy thing that you can test on the paid search side, and something that we try to be really disciplined and good about is always testing. And obviously it's important to have some organizational agreement that testing means that we're not always going to be right, and sometimes we're going to do things that make our performance worse. But every time we do that, we try to learn something and apply it to the next test that we do. That's all I have this morning, unless there are any questions.
Any question for Luke?
All right.
Let me ask one concerning the KPI and different measures.
Yep.
Do you have any kind of relation of composite, if you will? You know, this leads to this leads to this, and there are two camps currently. One say, well, because the customer touch points are totally different and it's changing all the time, so bets could be all off. But again, the old marketing says they have to go through the funnel, so to speak. Do you have any thought on that?
So the question is, when you have a website, you have a business with maybe a long sales cycle or a complicated buying process, how do you understand what you should actually be measuring on the site when you don't have something really clear, like a menu download or something? That's definitely challenging. Sometimes we don't have a real great answer for that. So I worked with Workscape, which is an organization out in Massachusetts that sells HR software to Fortune 500 companies, and their customers are CMOs of these large global organizations. We can do things like put up white papers that are gated by emails and things like that to try and engage what we're doing. But at the end of the day, there's only so much value that they see in that acquisition source, and really what they're looking for us to do is bring people in at that top of the funnel, if you will, or at that trigger or evaluation point. And so sometimes in situations like that, you have to just accept that we're going to be really disciplined in who we're targeting and how we're targeting them and why we're targeting them. And then you might have to just accept some level of uncertainty and use maybe diagnostic metrics more to try and understand, like, at least are we bringing people in who are interested in the content or the product that we have available to them.
Question?
Yeah.
As people moving from consideration to purchase use different KPIs to measure their engagement, do you connect these KPIs overall to see how much people moving from consideration to purchase, or how do you handle it?
Yeah. So there's, we have a lot of things we can measure. One of the challenges that we do have in digital is because we have all these things we can measure, we want to measure them all, and there's some limitations in terms of user level measurement. So a lot of tools out there are getting better at measuring people on a user level, which is a roundabout way of saying, like, in a situation like that where you're saying we are trying to advertise and reach people at different points in this process, and we want to get a better understanding of when we reach someone at that trigger activity, do we actually move them over the next 3 to 4 months over? So Google Analytics is a free tool. It can do about 90% of what anybody would ever need it to do. And they're getting better at giving you some user level data. You can look at things such as, what's the first traffic source that brought someone in, how many days was it before that person converted, how many sessions did it require before they converted. So you can start to get a sense even with free tools like that. But it's definitely a challenge, especially if you have a long sales cycle. So like at Duo, it's usually, within a week. If someone comes to our site and they haven't signed up for a free trial, they're probably not coming back 30 days later. So we have a pretty short cycle there. But if you have, 6-month, 9-month windows of time, it becomes pretty challenging.
He comes to us from Hanson Inc. He is a digital marketing and metrics lead over there. It is a digital agency we're talking about. He specializes in aligning clients' business goals to the digital space and delivering positive ROI. He has a passion for engineering novel ways to bridge digital marketing and technology to engage customers in multi-touch point experiences. Chris is an EMU alum and He got his start by taking courses in Google AdWords and web page design, and he has been in the industry for 6 years, including the last 4 years as a leading person in the Hanson team. Thank you. Welcome. Chris, please.
Thanks. So I think Luke kind of alluded to the fact, like, what were we going to speak about when we were asked to speak here today? And my story is actually kind of interesting. As you pointed out earlier, I am an EMU alum. I graduated here in 2008. And in a completely different field than I'm currently in, so we never know what we're going to do. I actually got my degree in electronic media and film, and kind of went down that road, and then came back to Bud Gibson, who's kind of the head of everything today. Everybody saw him earlier. I took actually the first class in Google AdWords that was offered here in the January of 2008. And it's kind of led me to where I am today. So it's a very interesting career path, but enjoying every minute of it. But today we're going to talk a little bit about audience segmentation and kind of delivering a custom experience. This is going to take a bit different path than the prior two speakers. They took a lot of the advertising space and then kind of moving into as Eric alluded to, like the back-end metrics and understanding and analyzing that. This kind of takes that front-end area out of things and kind of moves straight into an analytics, things from an analytics perspective. So we're not going to be discussing a campaign in general, but I'm going to kind of take you through a story of a client that we've handled, and then hopefully pull it back to being able to understand this and apply it to all of your businesses or jobs as well. So I like to let everybody know what we're talking about, so I kind of go through the who, what, when, where, why area. So I'm keeping it kind of generic, but we're talking about a direct selling company here. So think, like Mary Kay or something like that might be. That's not who it is, but you can kind of think along those lines. The what is delivering a behavioral experience by different audiences, and then this site kind of is the what, and this is actually not necessarily an end user facing site, but you have the company up here, they have consultants, and then they sell to the end users. So this is more focused around those consultants and how they're building internally. Why? Generating higher engagement, sales, and satisfaction, and the how is creating dimensions around known behaviors and segments in analytics. So hopefully I don't get too down the technical path, but we'll bring it all back in the end here. So kind of the setup of the company that we're looking at. So I said that they have these consultants, and there's literally over 100,000 consultants throughout the United States. So quite a large consultant base. We're going to look at this specific example of this company, but really in the end, everybody might not be able to get to the point that they're at, but we'll look at some ways of accomplishing that same path and same things. So here we see, they have the over 100,000 consultants, as I said, and all those consultants are on different levels. So they come in on the consultant level, which we'll see here in a bit, and can go all the way up to like a national executive director. So honestly, it's just their progression. Like, I might have started out as an analyst and been promoted to a lead or something throughout my career. So this really focuses on the need to grow those consultants, and then also ways that they are going about doing that. So their needs, as you can see here, sales growth, increasing their customer service base, and also the end user reach, so getting a further reach out there. And ways that they do that within this site is through different literature and things that they have on the site. It's all based around training for the most part. And then they have different quizzes and things that people can go through, and also different videos that they can learn from as well. So with that, what we're seeing here is kind of like a few months ago, their old site, what it looked like. We see, from the top, everything was grouped into the same bucket. So there were 7 different levels of consultants that were coming through this site, in various portions of their careers, of their business and such, but they were all grouped together. We couldn't necessarily break them apart. So when we looked at all of those consultants, we saw their total number of sessions or visits, total number of users, bounce rate, time on site, everything was clumped together. And that was kind of like, the high level metrics. And then when we broke things down into what are they actually doing, some of our success measures or KPIs, we still had everything grouped together. Total quizzes, literature, videos. We didn't know necessarily who was doing this or how they were interacting with it, if there were differences between these different audiences. So then what we did here is got into custom dimensions within Google Analytics. So this is a bit more of an advanced analytics feature. This is not just Google oriented. But however, we're going to, like I said before, we'll bring it back to understanding how you can do this if you can't get to a custom dimension segment. So what this did was, default segments in Google Analytics would be something like country, states, gender, age, all that good stuff. And a custom dimension is basically anything that you really want it to be. This could honestly be anything from putting a page author on a blog post up to someone's favorite color, if you honestly had that kind of offline data to work with there. So this site you have to log into with a unique ID. So what we did was upon login, are now capturing that ID and creating a dimension that we can now see in Google Analytics. So that's a kind of a unique ID area. You can't get into any personally identifiable information with Google Analytics or any analytics program for that matter. But as long as you're keeping things on a random, unique numbered basis, you can kind of match data that offline to that online data. So then from there, we take, so now we have this unique ID. And we have this ID in an offline basis and now into Google Analytics. So in this specific example, what we did is we can match that ID offline to these consultants' levels. So I can know that consultant 1, 2, 3, 4 is a senior consultant versus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is maybe a director. And we can upload that on the back end of Google Analytics, and all of a sudden, when somebody logs in with the custom dimension that we created for the unique user ID, we can then understand what level they are on and be able to break down different things within that level so we can kind of group it together. So what that necessarily allows us to do and looks like is by creating these custom dimensions on these user-defined levels, we're now able to see activity by consultant level and see a clear difference between the needs between each of these audiences. So I kind of bolded some of the stuff so we could see the number of users within the consultant base, or we could see, like on the director level, the number of videos that are being viewed or which videos are being viewed by director level people. So understanding really how each group interacts with each different piece of activity and how that allows our site analysts and such to get a better understanding for their need within each individual group, which can potentially lead to dynamic content. So if I logged in and I'm a consultant versus a senior consultant, I might see different things on the homepage based off of my known needs through our analysis. We never really want to break things down all the way to the individual level. And like I said, with 100,000 different consultants going on, we're never going to be able to deliver a truly custom experience based on each thing. So these different levels, as I said, there were 7 before. I'm not going to take you through all 7. We're just going to concentrate on 3 or 4 here. It allows us to kind of get a better understanding from group to group through there. So as I said, this then allowed us to push dynamic content onto the site based off of that consultant level, and definitely get more useful information out in front of each consultant that they can use to grow. And they're now understanding that the business is taking their needs into consideration, getting them the information that they need faster. They can grow better. The company as a whole grows better as well. So you don't need to pay too much attention to the small text on the screen, I'm sure, but kind of what we found overall. So we have these different levels here: consultant, senior consultant, director, senior director. These are the 4 lowest level areas that we're going to concentrate on. But what we saw was consultants overall were using the site much more than other groups. However, they weren't really interested, or they weren't using it as much, I should say, as other groups. But they were very much interested in business resources and the My Business sections, which is areas that they're going to like trying to understand, where do I fit in here? I'm brand new to this program. How am I going to be able to grow my base and grow my business as well? Whereas senior consultants, they're kind of integrated into the program now. They are at a level where it's like, I need to set new goals. I need to take my business to the next level. And they're much more goal-oriented. They're in the My Skills section, which is where you take the quizzes and get some literature as well to grow your business base. Whereas the last two we can kind of group together a bit, on the director and senior director level. We see that most of them, they both want and have a need to celebrate their own successes. And they want to celebrate, tell their stories, hear other stories from other successful consultants, so that they can kind of use that to grow themselves even further. But we have a celebrate success area on the site, and they're always in there. They want more out of that and to kind of be appreciated on that front. So what did that bring about from a change perspective? So as I said, back a couple of slides, we wanted to use this to generate dynamic content on the site by each individual consultant base. So this definitely, in just a small bit of analysis, honestly, allowed us to do this. And now when a consultant comes through into their homepage, there's stronger call-outs to the My Business and development sections to help them get more acquainted with the company as a whole and start to grow more quickly than they may have before. So they're not digging around the site trying to find things, using internal search, asking questions. It's kind of a bit more streamlined. For senior consultants, we're now promoting quizzes much more, giving them more training touch points upon login. They're, along with the suggested new quizzes or quizzes that they might be not have taken at the moment to progress them a bit further down their goal path. And then on the senior director and director level, there's more of an upfront push to get them into sharing their stories with other consultants, promoting themselves through social media and such as well, because they have closed groups within Facebook and whatnot that they can promote themselves into as well. So kind of what this means to us as a whole is really, kind of taking it to your site today. Obviously, it's a specific example to one place to one company that can integrate all of this, but every business is definitely going to have different customer types across the board and or different employee activities as well within their company. So harnessing the power really of online and offline analytics is really what this all goes back to. And we're getting to a point where that's much more easy to do. As I talked about, we were able to take some offline data that we had about these consultants and through the power of Google Analytics, be able to upload that and connect it to online data. This has been a push from Google for the last couple of years. We're a Google Analytics certified partner at Hansen and able to go out and thankfully to San Francisco every year and kind of get the latest and greatest updates on Google Analytics. And back 2 years ago is when this kind of all started, and they're really starting to push, trying to connect all the different data points to the buzzword of last year really was big data, and understanding that from one digital platform. So, as I said, not everybody has a site where people are logging in that you can grab digital data from them and know your individual users, and not every company has distinct characteristics of certain customer types, but however, we do all have access to analytics programs, whether it's Google Analytics or Site Catalyst within Adobe or Web Trends or whatnot. So using Google Analytics as an example, as I have throughout here, we definitely want to look for patterns between different sets of users and develop them into segments. So we all know the different segments that are available by default within analytics, mobile users, referring traffic, and whatnot. But we also can create our own segments with just a few clicks of a button to understand our users a bit better. And that's through the use of advanced segments. So, for instance, like in a retail situation, we all have kind of that product researcher who's looking at some detail but never really purchases. They're kind of going between sites and trying to probably find the best price overall. versus product, browsers who they're not in a specific product, but they're kind of, looking at 10 different products that you might have, but still not purchasing. Comparison shoppers, if anybody has compare tools on their site, things that do that, and then versus the purchaser as well. So you have 4 distinct patterns that really, through looking at the activity on different pages, site sections, and the such that is almost, for the most part, tracked by default within Google Analytics, we can kind of separate those actions into different segments and start to define our user base a bit better and define some audiences. I have up here, a lot of times we deal with a lot of manufacturers and such that have both like the homeowner side and the pro side of things, or in the healthcare industry, patients versus physicians, and they might be all going to the same site, but they have very different activities within those sites. So really, in the end, it's kind of going back to like, no matter the depth of the data that you have, you already have a starting point. Any site that's out there, as I said, you're going to be able to look into different pages, look into different site activities if you have custom events tracked or different goals, and kind of understand the difference in those audience segments a bit better. And then down at the bottom, I just put some short links out there for anybody that's interested more in creating custom segments. There's great, great articles and things out there. This links directly to Google, so they'll tell you how to do everything within there. And then I talked about dynamic content earlier, and there's actually very easy ways and a couple of good tools out there that help you within creating dynamic content. We don't all have a vast programmer base or knowledge. I know I don't. So to get to that custom data, so there are tools such as a tool called BT Buckets that's out there, and that will take you to that to be able to not only help you define your different audience segments, but to be able to start to push dynamically driven content to them, which in the end should get you a higher conversion rate and more interaction within your site. So with that, I thank you for your time, and I open to any questions.
Are there any questions?
Yes.
Specifically to, you talked about the segments, and I'm assuming in that kind of example, they're trying to drive people from up the ladder in order to do that. And it really hit home for me because we're kind of in a project similar to that. So I guess my question is, how do you, like the segments that you uploaded to analytics is a snapshot at that moment in time. So how do you adjust for, how often do you adjust, or is it dynamically fed into analytics to allow for people to shift between segments?
So for this particular client, the offline data that we're uploading for their levels, that can change. We kind of try to upload it on maybe a monthly or bi-monthly basis. It's just a spreadsheet upload, so you can automate that through the API as well if you have a digital source for that. But really, it's just kind of making sure that you're staying on top of that, and then it won't backtrack at all. That's one thing about custom dimensions and such. Once we're uploading that data, it's from that point onwards. So then when we would upload a new file as well, it would take, like if I uploaded a new file with different consultant levels today, then I would see those levels from this point onward. Keeping that under control and such, using annotations and such in Google Analytics just to make sure that I know I uploaded X file on this date that was data for October versus November, is probably the best way about that from the dimensions standpoint. Segments, a custom segment, obviously you can create at any time, go back into the data as well. So that more or less is just trying to keep things consistent on that point, making sure that you're labeling things very well as well. One of the issues that we have come across prior is custom segments are based on login. So I have one master login for all of our clients. So if I don't name a segment with the client name and then what it is, it can be all over the place. So keeping your data well organized is definitely a good point as well. So.
Any other questions?
Sure.
Do you do any retargeting off of your custom segments?
We have done retargeting off custom segments for sure. So the question was, about retargeting. Google Analytics has actually made it very easy to, as long as you're using AdWords as well, to retarget based off of different segments, and they even now are suggesting different segments for you. Personally, I wouldn't necessarily recommend they do that. I would recommend you go through your own custom segments so you know exactly what's happening. But yes, we've definitely done that based off of those segments. That's where, a lot of people have come to me. Actually, Bud Gibson even came to me when he first spoke to me about presenting here and said, we were talking about remarketing, and he said that he was like, well, has that actually worked for you? Because I've heard a lot of negative stories around that. And I brought up a great example with actually this client that I was talking about today, where we ran a regular paid search campaign and our overall conversion rate was about 2.5%. But on the remarketing side of things, our conversion rate went up to about 5 or 6%. And I think that it's understanding, from a remarketing standpoint, understanding, connecting your message to a specific audience. Eric brings up a good point about custom segments, because you can create so many minor variables within custom segments that you could have 30 different segments. But if you're aligning your retargeting message to each one of those, if you have the time and budget to do so, it's going to pay off in the end. Even if it's an extra % of a conversion rate, it could be the difference between $10,000, $20,000 in some instances. So it's interesting. Anything else? Sure.
Maybe for the whole panel. Do you have any advice on how you would value an impression or value a conversion? We're always trying to monetize that. This campaign got so many impressions and it's worth X. It got 1 million impressions. So what's your advice on that?
I'll go and then pass it over to them. But
Repeat the question so everybody.
so the question was around value of an impression. So understanding, I'm getting 5 million impressions off of a campaign. However, what is the true value of that? And I'm unfortunately forgetting if it was Eric or Luke that said this, but they went back in their presentation. They were talking about. Yeah, it was Luke, actually, now that I'm thinking, about, keeping the goal and understanding, what your end goal is. So if you're running a, paid, this isn't going to fully answer your question, I apologize, but if you're running a paid search campaign and the value and what you're looking at from an impression basis is going to be far drastically different from if you're running a display media campaign, where most display campaigns are more based off of awareness. There's been many studies that show, a view through. So if people are seeing that impression but not clicking, but they go back to your site later, considered a view through, that's where there's a lot of added value to that. So hopefully they can answer your question a little bit better. But I think it's just dependent on, from a starting point, what your end goal is and kind of the advertising space that you're in. I don't know.
I would say you can get it real complicated, like if you have tracking all the way through your site, maybe if you're able to say, okay, this many people saw my ads, these impressions, and then this all went down to like an email sign up or like a form submit. You can do the math and just divide everything and say, okay, so for every 1,000 impressions I tend to get 1 lead. So you can kind of measure it then, and then you say, okay, that lead usually accounts for $20,000 in revenue. So then you can kind of do the math there. But I think you kind of want to bucket into what story an impression can tell. So usually impression is, again, kind of an awareness category. So that's just people seeing you and learning more. So that's not necessarily leads and clicks and whatnot. So I would take a look at, again, if you're opening a new coffee shop or if you're running a display campaign, so if you have a big, cool image or something like that, impressions are more valuable. In paid search, impressions usually aren't as valuable because it's like, tell people paid search ad is like half a tweet. So just getting impressions usually isn't the best metric to look at. So, but again, if you're doing, a big image ad, kind of like a billboard, the more people that see that, the better. But so really kind of look at what you're trying to achieve. The goal is the goal is the goal is the goal is the goal. So don't try and take like revenue and put revenue all the way back up to impressions. Look at more revenue as a purchase consideration is more like what happens on your site. The impressions, the clicks are more front end, and it's more just kind of, how are you doing on whatever channel, whether it's Facebook or Google or whatever.
Yeah, and would almost never use impression as a measure of performance. I've worked with organizations that are big brands, so Cottonelle, Pop-Tarts, brands like that, where when we're advertising online, we're so far removed from that point of purchase on shelf in the grocery store. And they are such big, well-known brands that a lot of what they do from an advertising perspective is brand, it's not even awareness at that point, it's trying to shift like consumer perceptions of the brand towards different attributes and different things like that. And so for campaigns like that, they will try to use impressions. And they'll pay lots of money to people like Nielsen to run these things called market mix models, which consume data from all their TV buys, newspaper, print, all these different things, and break it down by geographic segments and try to understand like what the value of that impression is. And I've worked on the digital agency side for a long time where we tried to justify what we were doing with that, and it's always a really hard conversation because it almost never shows the positive ROI on what we do. And I think that, you know, those are situations where those are actually organizations with lots of money, lots of advertising, and a more compelling reason to be concerned about impressions and different things like that. I think for 99% of companies, that's, you know, we should focus on, again, like getting closer to that point of purchase, whatever that might be, and then really measuring against that.
Tracking is a big thing. We didn't talk a lot about it today, but like if you're measuring anything, it's obviously, you know, you can get Google Analytics or Omniture or whatever. So the more data you can get, the closer you can get. You know, if you're e-commerce, if you're Zappos, you know, or something like that, it's super easy because you say, okay, how many people hit buy, or if you're Amazon. But if you're a law firm or if you're a, you know, a donut shop, you're like, okay, well, how am I going to track how many donuts did I sell based on paid search? So you got to, you know, you can maybe do little stuff like, oh, we had a big special, we, you know, put it up there, and then, you know, sales increased a little bit. So you might have to measure or do, you know, creative ways to, you know, try and report out and see what the impact was. But it's not easy.
We have a little time for one more question.
Can I go first?
Yeah.
Okay. So my name is Ahmad Madani, CIS major. My question for Luke actually, because I tried to ask earlier. How long would you wait before you suspend unsuccessful strategy, for example? And how could you pass this information to the upper level manager?
Sure. So the question is, when we've got a strategy, we're running tests, and we think that it might not be working, so when do we decide to pull the plug on it? I think if we're talking real specifically about ad text testing, landing page testing, things like that, even if you're not running it through a tool like Optimizely or something, which is going to give you, these are the mathematical results that are being observed, there's a lot of free stuff online. If you just do a search for a statistical significance calculator, Optimizely, a lot of these tools will have actually just pages on that you can go to, and you can put in, these were the number of clicks I got, or these were the number of visits to a page, and these were the number of conversions, and it'll tell you definitively, yes, you have a statistically significant difference. When in doubt, I always try to, you know, go back to that. Like we can look at things and say we think that this one's doing better, but a lot of times we're just trying to validate our own assumptions going into something. So if we're seeing, you know, if we run a test for a couple of weeks, we've got a lot of data coming in, and we have statistical significance, we can confidently pull the plug on it. If we have a lot of data, we've been running it for a while, and we don't see any real difference, that tells us something too. Then, you know, our assumptions going into it, that there is a compelling reason to show A versus B was wrong, and at that point we can just go with whichever one we want and try to figure out what would actually create some difference.
And how do you pass this negative information for the upper level manager?
It's not negative.
Yeah, I mean, so right now I have the benefit of working in an organization that likes data and likes numbers and results, so that helps when your founders are engineers because they understand the value of, you know, testing and optimization. When you don't have that, I had that a lot on the agency side where we have people on the account side who don't want us to show negative results to the client because why would we have done something and then, you know, actually damage business or something potentially. So there is a lot of tension there. You have to get buy-in on, if not being data-driven, at least being data-informed. So we don't have to use data to drive all our decision-making, but when we're making decisions, they should be at least informed by data. So we can make assumptions. We can have a lot of smart people in the room that come up with ideas, but we should at least make sure we're grounding that at some level of actual data.
If there's no chance for it to fail and you know it's going to work, that's just a change. That's not a test. So if you're presenting, hey, we're going to test this, if they're real conservative, if they're not dual security, you can do like a real iterative thing, you know, and say, okay, we're just going to do it in this little area, or say they know they make a ton of money off the Detroit metropolitan area. Well, don't test it there. Test it in North Dakota. Not to pick on North Dakota, but you know, test it somewhere small, and you know, say, okay, we're seeing, you know, we did a little bit, we're not seeing a good trend, so we'll shut it off early. But like I said, hopefully you have a good client and try to educate them, get them up to that level where they know it is a test.
And I would also add to that, always have your next move. So like, you know, it's okay to fail. Obviously, that's how we learn and how we are testing different things. But when you're coming to upper level management and you need to pause a campaign and get onto the next thing that you're recommending, have a why of, you know, we know why this failed, and we understand moving forward what to do, and have that right in your back pocket. Well, now we need to do this, because if they see like the next thing, it's like, okay, because of X, now we're going to do Y. It can soften the blow a little. So.
Very good. Thank you all. I thank your presenters and